When somebody refuses to stand during their country's national anthem, is it a legitimate protest or just plain insulting? American footballers are using the pitch to protest about racial inequality. And is that, though, the place to deliver a message? This is Roundtable with me, David Foster. It began as one player's protest during the playing of the Star-Spangled Banner and what is now called taking the knees. Overtaken, in some ways, the game of American football. Some say the very issue of racial inequality itself. As more and more NFL players follow Colin Kaepernic's lead, others are backing Donald Trump, insisting it is offensive to the US and its Constitution.
He's become the most polarizing figure in American sport. His protest a symbol of the country's ethnic divide. Colin Kaepernic took a stand against racial injustice in August 2016 during the national anthem.
I'll continue to sit. I'm going to continue to stand with the people that are being oppressed.
Other teams followed suit.
Until we see change, we will continue to protest.
Sparking a national row about patriotism and racism.
I think it's misguided to protest the anthem and the flag because people don't see it as an issue. They see it as protesting against the people who have given their lives for this country.
The fact is that our Constitution guarantees people the right to express themselves freely.
But is contention over the US flag and anthem detracting from the message? Should sport and protests mix? The fatal shooting of Michael Brown by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. It became a flashpoint for protests against police brutality in America. A long list of celebrities spoke out against it, including football quarterback Colin Kaepernic, who began sitting during the national anthem, then kneeling.
To me, this is something that has to change, and when there's significant change, and I feel like that flag represents what it's supposed to represent, and this country is representing people the way that it's supposed to, I'll stand.
Dozens of NFL stars and other athletes have taken the knee, as have musicians, reacting in part to Donald Trump's criticism of it.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a off the field right now, out, he's fired. Fired!
Some say the United States is now more racially split than it has been in recent history. Others say the debate is simply about respecting the American flag.
I still feel like if you are an American, you should stand and show respect to the flag and what it symbolizes.
Entertainment and sports stars have been taking a stand against racial inequality for decades. In 1967, Muhammad Ali refused to fight in Vietnam over the treatment of black people in America. At the Olympics in 1968, American athletes Tommie Smith and John Carlos made the Black Power salute as they were given their medals. It began with one man and became a movement. One that could see Colin Kaepernick and other players lose out on contracts and sponsorship deals. A protest that began on the football field may now have enough momentum to continue off it.
Let's introduce our participants going via Skype, or coming to us via Skype from Texas. The Republican House Representative James Earl White in the studio. Mike Carlson, I beg your pardon, an NFL commentator and writer. To my left, the former NBA player John Amaechi, and Rashid Nix, who's an Equalities campaigner based in London. Congressman, let me come to you first of all in Texas. A lot of people are saying this isn't about the national anthem. Others are insisting that it is. But what do you think a national anthem should mean?
What I think the national anthem means, it encapsulates the values and the ideas and even the hopes and aspirations that we believe that the country should live up to, and in some instances may be living.
So when somebody refuses to stand during the national anthem, do you think that's insulting, or do they have a right to do whatever they want? It is a free country.
Well, here, look, as a member of the Texas House of Representatives, my responsibility is to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of our great state of Texas. Obviously, people have the right to express themselves. I support and uphold the First Amendment, but I would also say that the First Amendment is a two-way street, and I don't agree with that method or mode of expressing an opinion, but I do accept it as a form of opinion protected under the First Amendment.
Okay, Congressman, thank you very much indeed. Come back to the studio. And Mike and John, I should explain that you're both British and American citizens, right, so that you can look at it from the point of view of living in this country and being Americans as well. Whether you like it or not, a lot of people think this is about the national anthem and disrespect and the American flag. Now, you can say it isn't, but you've got to face up to the fact that millions of people do think it's that way.
That's true, and they're being also encouraged to think that way by people starting with the President of the United States for reasons which we can discuss, I'm sure, in a moment or so. But there's certainly no legal requirement to stand for the national anthem or the raising of the flag. And I've been seeing this for 50 years. When we were anti-war demonstrating in the 1960s, we heard the same thing. You can't disrespect the flag. You have the right to protest, but this is something different. The Supreme Court has ruled that even things like burning the flag are not against the law, are not a violation of the Constitution. So that's pretty, from the American Supreme Court, that's pretty outright staying. And back in 1968, the NFL decreed that players would have to, and it's still a guideline, it's not a rule, but it's a guideline, that players would have to stand in a straight line, hold their helmets in their left hand, put their right hands over their heart, and stay still while the anthem was being played. And one guy, Dave Megacy, on the St. Louis Cardinals, protested, as it were, simply by moving around and holding his helmet, not doing that. He was out of the league within a year, wrote a book called Out of Their League. I'm watching the same thing happen now.
But surely people have as much right to object to what the players are doing as the players have a right to do what they're doing. Yes,
but the First Amendment doesn't cover rabid fans in terms of this context. It doesn't stop them from protesting. In fact, it says that they can protest with the same vigor as Colin Kaepernick or any of his other peers. The First Amendment, however, is supposed to stop the government from intruding onto that. So, for example, seemingly innocuous but deeply worrying phrases like the First Amendment is a two-way street, which means almost nothing, which is convenient because it means anything you want it to mean. And in the subtext that leaks out to the fans of these particular types of people who say these words, it's the subtext that says, oh, so the First Amendment has a caveat.
The First Amendment, we should say, freedom of speech.
Right. It is it's the right, it's the protection from the government impinging on your freedom of speech. It doesn't stop corporations or other things from saying things about you, or you saying things about corporations. But yes, it does stop the government from interfering.
Rashid, is this helping race relations? Is it helping to end inequality? Because this is about the way that particularly young black men in the United States are perceived to be treated.
Well, what I would say in regards to is it helping race relations is actually putting the whole debate back on the agenda, which is it's a very important debate. But you know, if you imagine 50 years ago, 1968, you had black athletes that were, protesting with a Black Power salute. 50 years later, you now have highly paid black athlete going down on one knee. So you think, well, where's the progress in this? I think James Brown had a tune in 1968 called Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. We'd rather die on our feet than live on our knees. And to see, going down on one knee as a protest, I'm like, well, are we going backwards here?
And I think he's absolutely right in the sense that we are going backwards, and we have gone backward. We saw 8 years of a black American president with an opposition that was...
And of course this started under Obama. Well, we should point that out. This didn't start when President Trump became president.
An opposition that was dedicated to stymieing everything he tried to do, with a subtext being because he was black, not because he was a Democrat or because he was somewhat to the left of people. And we have seen since 9/11.
Sorry, James, we'll come to you in just a second. I can see you want to say something.
We've seen since 9/11 and the Bureau of Homeland Security growing up and taking huge amounts of money out of the federal budget. That money has been redirected not to stop terrorism, but in terms of domestic enforcement. You've got police in American communities who are being militarized with armored vehicles, weaponry, things like that. And when the population, say, of Ferguson, Missouri, sees these police move in and perceives them as an occupying force, the Black Lives Matter movement, which is what this was about and should be about in the start, takes on a lot of meaning.
Let's bring in James, Congressman from Texas, once again on this. I don't know whether you were agreeing or disagreeing with what was said. Just make your point, and then I've got a question for you.
Thank you so much. Let me tell you something. Obviously, I didn't vote for the president. I'm a conservative Republican, but he was my president while he was serving as president. But more white people voted for President Obama than what we consider so-called minorities in the United States. So I just think it's preposterous when folks say, they overplay this race card. But I will say this on the race card issue. Today in this current history, the United States can boast that it has the largest population and the largest proportion of people of color living in freedom and prosperity at any time in this human civilization and compared to any country on the globe right now.
Okay, well, we're talking at that point. I know John wants to say something. He's shaking his head in despair.
At some point.
Allow me to just sort of ask one particular question. You told our producer that you think what Trump is doing and saying about this will unite the nation in common values and ideas. It's having the opposite effect, isn't it?
I don't think it's having the opposite effect. Again, the First Amendment is the U.S. Constitution. When I see a vigorous debate of ideas among Americans, I say that is the American Constitution, that is the American body politic working perfectly. So again, when I say the First Amendment is a two-way street, obviously, as a public official, even in the capacity of a private citizen, I have a First Amendment right of opinion. And these men and women that are on the fields of professional play, obviously they have some measure of First Amendment rights.
Okay, I asked John to just keep quiet for a second, but it's unwise to ask a big fella like this to stay silent for too long if you're sitting next to him.
Everyone has the right to rebuttal under the First Amendment. You're allowed to protest someone protesting. It's allowed. What you're not allowed is to have the leader of the government, and in fact the free world, interject against the First Amendment and say, because these people that he calls sons of because of these people are protesting, they should lose their job. That is an intervention too far for any government official, and certainly the leader of the free world. Now, for the previous comment, it just boggles the mind that a person from a country with, I mean, Britain has a shameful empire-building legacy, but
that's
I don't forget it at any point. But America, it's so recent. It's so there to say, oh yes, we've got the largest population of black people living in freedom in the entire world. It's such an absurd statement because it's so hyperbolic as to be able to shoot holes in it, but not being worth doing it. Because that is red meat to his base, who will not question any part of that. The privilege, the systemic privilege in America that exists in our country, in Britain too, and almost everywhere else where there are different kinds of people living together is real. And the idea that you can pretend it isn't real by saying black people have more freedom now than they did under slavery is a little absurd.
But Rashid, yes. Looking at some of the pictures, like the one behind me, we see white guys standing, we see black guys standing, we see black guys kneeling down, white guys kneeling down. This is divisive rather than binding, isn't it, in some ways?
I don't think it's divisive. It's if you represent a certain section of the American populace, then you will see it as being very divisive. But I would say, really, it's bringing a discussion forward that needs to be had. There is a terrible problem in the United States around race. The gentleman said that, you know, United States has the highest number of free black people, people of color. It also has the largest prison population comprised of people of color. So give and take, as you say, sir, you know. And so you think there's all these real inconsistencies going on. If, you know, under a black president, you can have black men murdered and it's uploaded onto YouTube so we can all watch it, and there's no indictments, then there's a problem.
Limited time on this break. I want to get onto the sport and politics. How's this affecting the game? Should it be allowed because sport and politics should be separate?
Yeah, I mean,
or
sport
not?
and politics is always mixed. Everything we do sporting has some sort of political meaning in it, starting with the Olympic Games and working its way down.
Well, 1936 is a prime example of that. Hitler's
in America,
Berlin
they play the national anthem. It used to be sort of at colleges and then high schools, now at Pee-wee games. They play it before all kinds of sports events. When I moved to Britain in 1977, they used to play the national anthem here before you went to the movies.
At the end of the movie?
At the end. You stood up at the end and, you know, sang God Save the Queen. But in
or you
America,
got out before the title.
It's so pervasive, and it is a sort of political gesture that's unnecessary.
But sport and politics inevitable, but welcome or not?
Well, what's happened here is that...
Can you have it both ways with sport and politics? So this is ridiculous. We talk about athletes and we want them to be role models. I'm sure that James has mentioned that he wants athletes to be role models. And it's fine. You watch American television and British television and athletes are there selling young people from families who can't afford it everything from pet insurance through to sugar water that's blue. And yet somehow, when there are the most important issues happening in our country, we don't want athletes to step up and be role models. I'm sorry, the idea that we should be selling children from families who can't afford it in the UK and America shoes made by children in Bangladesh, and that's a perfectly fine, upstanding thing for an athlete.
Well, do you want to ask him the question?
But certainly not okay for an athlete to uphold the Constitution as the President of the United States is supposed to.
I will ask you then, James, Congressman in Texas, have you said that sportsmen should be role models?
Well, I think we all have a responsibility as adult black men, adult men in general, to serve as role models. However, I think the most important role models are fathers and mothers. For me, role models as I was growing up were military veterans, and that's why I'm a military veteran to this day. But I just want to, ask the gentleman, as a member of the Texas legislature or as the President of the United States, are you under the belief that the First Amendment doesn't apply to us either, that we can't articulate an opinion? I will tell you this, I will say it right now. I don't know how many people watch your show. I think a lot of people watch it because I'm on it. But if I turn on my TV and I see any sports figure not respecting the national anthem or the U.S. flag on American soil or even on British soil, I will...
Well, let me just read this out quickly from the Wall Street Journal, then you can come back on it. The Wall Street Journal says, now the players want to be politicians and use their fame to lecture other Americans, disrespecting the national anthem, a symbol of nationhood that thousands have died for. But the players, they say, the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, say they are lecturing.
Why doesn't the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal get to talking about World War III, about to begin with Korea, the failed attempts to repeal and now defund the Affordable Care Act in America, the budget that's going to go through and direct billions and billions of dollars to Donald Trump and his ilk of rich people. There are 5, 6, 7 major issues that are out there in America right now, and we've very, very cleverly been deflected into talking about what should be talk about Black Lives Matter, but now is talk about respecting the flag. And like I said, they did this 50 years ago during the Vietnam War, and the protests were about the Vietnam War. They were about racial equality in 1966, 1967, 68.
Yeah, and Jane Fonda went there, and
it became
a big
about the
symbol,
flag.
and she's now admitted it's a mistake.
Yeah, it's not about the flag. It's about America.
It's amazing how vigorous elected officials and others are in America right now about protecting a symbol, but not about protecting what the symbol is supposed to stand for. If all this worries, I mean, I would love to see James's fury at men who wear American flag Speedos, the men who wear biker helmets with the American flag on, the people who put them around their waist as towels at the beach. I would love to see the vigor of anger at all those people disrespecting the flag. But no, instead, let's direct it at people who are simply pointing out that if you're black and unarmed, you are disproportionately likely, and not by 1 or 2 times, but by 6, 11, 12, 20 times, to be killed by the police. No, I'm sorry.
Wrong.
This is a good reason.
James, I want to bring Rashid. Yeah, I want to bring Rashid in.
And before he questions me, I'm the social scientist around the table. You may be the elected official. I'm the social scientist.
I'm going to bring Rashid in at this point and just talk about the wider picture, the influence on young people. There's a school in Louisiana that has said if you do what these other players are doing, you're off the football pitch. You are dropped.
Yes. According to, from what I read, Thomas Jefferson, he said that dissent is the highest form of patriotism. One of your founding fathers, Congressman. And so we really have to, if we're going to look at this issue, we've got to look at it properly and not be very knee-jerk about it. If you have these sportsmen that are now stepping into the realm of politics, what it does reveal is that the elected politicians who should be serving the interests of the people are failing, which is why the sportsmen are having to pick up the baton. It's a terrible indictment upon the state of American politics. If you've got a guy who's paid to throw a ball trying to now play the role of a politician. Where are the black politicians?
Well, perhaps they have to, James. Perhaps people such as yourself are actually letting the Black Lives Matter campaign down, and this is the only way it can be highlighted, therefore it must be doing some good.
David, let me provide your host context about my job and what I've done in the Texas legislature. I've served in the Texas legislature since 2011. During the last session of our legislature, I served as the House Committee, the chairman of the House Committee. That's the House Committee that oversights our prison. Every session that I've served in the legislature, I've served on this House Committee on Prisons, and I have led the charge in closing prisons and drastically reducing the prison population.
But with due respect, James, this is not about you personally. I didn't mean it to be taken that way, but what I'm suggesting is that this campaign, the Kaepernick campaign, Take the Knee campaign, call it what you like, is working.
Well, we're talking about it. I'm passing author legislation to provide more oversight of the police, to reduce the number of children and adults in the prison system. So apparently it's working. But
Mike, sorry.
Well, sadly, we're not talking about it. We're talking about the flag, and now we're talking about the prison system, which is a valid point to talk about. But this started with Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick is a kid whose mother was white, father was black, was put up for adoption, raised by a white family, great high school student, went to university, whatever. If anybody in American society understands the gap and the gulf between white people and black people, it's Colin Kaepernick, whose parents have been incredibly supportive of him through this whole thing. But here is a guy who is visibly black, and he's wearing an afro now, which I'm sure all the people in the U.S. Senate look at and think it's the rebirth of the 60s again. But he comes from a white world and is seen as a black man and is acutely aware of what he's doing. And it's been done with dignity and respect from the start.
You guys? I suppose in microcosm, the failing that you mentioned in terms of politicians and politics is highlighted in this last exchange. Kaepernick is given, his charity is given $900,000 to various charities.
And we should add that he can't find a job at the moment.
He's not got a job. He's been constructively dismissed in essence and blackballed at this stage. But he talks about indeed. He talks about, we ask about the congressman about this situation, and he talks about what he's done. This is the same thing that Trump does. He talks about him. It's not about him. It's about other people, and other people who are struggling and suffering under a system of privilege that is real. I have benefited from it as I have been pained by it. My mother is white. I live in that same world where I am the most terrifying thing normally people see walking down the street unless I'm wearing a suit. So I understand this, but the idea that we're talking about the anthem or whether sport should be in politics, these things are combined. We want our athletes to be role models.
Okay.
This is a thing of our time.
How about this to wrap up the conversation, because we've talked an awful lot about that. Mike, as the sports commentator in this. Is this going to split the NFL, the owners, the players, the fans?
In the end, no. I think in the end, Jerry Jones, owner of the Dallas Cowboys, yesterday said that if the players took a knee, they wouldn't play. Now, I'm not sure he can actually make that decision on game day because owners aren't supposed to coach. But if 33 of the Dallas Cowboys decide to take a knee, they're not going to have enough players out there to be able to play the game efficiently anyway. And the NFL reacted to Trump attacking the NFL, and the players unified kind of behind that. I don't think that the NFL is going to allow their season to be run aground by this debate. I think they're going to wind up taking it. And in that sense, Trump, I'm hoping, is going to be counterproductive in that trying to drive a wedge between the owners and the players, between the white players and the black players, between the players and the fans, is going to prove ineffective.
I would love to carry this conversation on for a great deal longer, but unfortunately the television time is short, and I have to say thank you very much indeed. If you are the most terrifying thing I see today walking down the street, that'll be all right. That'll be all right. It's been a fascinating conversation, a public platform. I suppose all of this is a very powerful thing. With it, we believe, comes the opportunity to influence here and there, create awareness, perhaps even change some people's minds. I don't know if we've done that, but thank you very much indeed for speaking your minds today. I'm David Foster. This has been Roundtable. We thank you very much for watching and hope you tune in next time. Bye-bye for now.